This is a Parks Canada production. Ce balado est aussi disponible en français.
August 30th, 2017. The end of a hot, dry summer. A thunderstorm rolls in across the Keenau Mountain in southeastern British Columbia. There's a blinding flash as a bolt of lightning shoots through a century-old conifer tree. The sap superheats, expands, and explodes, igniting a fire. Strong winds feed the flames, engulfing tree after tree, spreading eastwards across the Alberta border into Waterton Lakes National Park. Over the next 5 weeks, the Keenau wildfire burns nearly 40% of the park.
Fire's been around a long time, from thunder, from lightning. It's just how you live with it, how you cope with it. Fire's the boss.
In the aftermath of wildfire, Indigenous knowledge and archaeology are deepening our understanding of the people who have lived and traveled in the Rocky Mountains and foothills for thousands of years.
If you think it's a beautiful place, someone 9,000 years ago is going to have thought it was a beautiful place. We as Westerners came in and made it a park, but it's always been a home.
I'm Fred Shepard, and you're listening to ReCollections, Archaeology in a Burned Landscape. Parks Canada is known worldwide as a leader in nature conservation, but we do much more than that. Together with our partners, we commemorate the people, places, and events that have shaped the place we now call Canada. Join us to meet experts from across the country as we explore the sites, stories, and artifacts that bring history to life. In this episode, we're heading to Waterton Lakes National Park in southwest Alberta. But the people of the Blackfoot Confederacy who have called this area home for millennia call it something else.
The Blackfoot call Waterton Lakes National Park, they've had a name for thousands of years already. So it's called Buktomoxikami. And that word means a sacred lake within, so the sacred lake within the mountains.
Special thanks to our consulting producers, Joseph Manyfingers, who you just heard from, and Dylan Frank, for helping us to understand this place from a Blackfoot perspective. Here's Ira Provost, consultation manager with the Piikani Nation, one of the 4 nations that make up the Blackfoot Confederacy, along with the Kainai, Siksika, and the Anskapi Piikani.
We as Blackfoot people, and particularly Piikani, we refer to ourselves as mountain people. Waterton Lakes National Park sits in the heart of our ancestral lands, in the heart of our territory. It's a place where we have our stories of creation, and it's where we believe that a lot of our sacred ways and laws were born from.
Waterton Lakes National Park is located in what's known today as southwestern Alberta, where the Rocky Mountains emerge dramatically from the prairies and the foothills. Montana's Glacier National Park is adjacent to Waterton Lakes, just across the U.S. border. In 1932, the two formed the Waterton-Glacier International Peace Park, the world's first. It was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1995 for superlative mountain scenery and abundant diversity of wildlife and wildflowers. And it's easy to see why. This sprawling area, nicknamed the Crown of the Continent, is a breathtaking network of craggy mountain peaks, crisp blue waters, verdant coniferous forests, prairie grasslands, and glaciers. Waterton Lakes National Park is a stunning, windy jewel in the center of that continental crown. It's also home to the picturesque Prince of Wales Hotel, a Swiss chalet-style building and National Historic Site built in the 1920s to welcome train travelers on the Great Northern Line. And at the end of the hot, dry summer of 2017, everything was threatened when that lightning strike on Keenau Mountain sparked a raging wildfire. For over a month, fire crews fought the blaze from the ground and the sky. When the ashes settled, the Kenow wildfire had scorched a total of 350 square kilometers of pine and larch forest. Once the evacuation order was lifted, the public was allowed back into the park. With much of the tree cover and underbrush gone, many beloved places were unrecognizable. Waterton Lakes hadn't looked like this in living memory. But that's not to say it never looked like this. Fire has played an important role in this area for a long time.
When the lightning starts a fire, there's a message.
This is Dr. Mike Brewsted, an elder from the Kainai Nation and a lecturer at the University of Lethbridge.
My Blackfoot name is Chief Bird, the eagle. My Christian and colonial name is Michael Dean Brewsted, and I am a residential school survivor. So fire isn't new. Forest fires, it cleans and purifies. Grass fires, forest fires, that's how it was. We didn't start swearing or cursing, damn fire. We let it be. There's a natural cleansing process of fire. And so we don't say, doggone it, that darn fire.
The Blackfoot people have many stories of the importance of this place and its long history.
This entire place was occupied and used and sustained and managed. And the coexistence that took place with the people and the natural environment was pristine. It was so elaborate and complex, but also simple at the same time.
Here's Parks Canada archaeologist Jennifer Ailes.
We see people having lived in this park back beyond 10,000 years, all the way up until the present day. This area, these lands and waters really are very popular throughout time, and we see a lot of people coming to the area to live, to play, to recreate, and to sustain themselves.
Now, after the fire, there was an opportunity for archaeology to reveal more.
My name is Bill Perry, and I worked for Parks Canada Archaeological Unit for about 35 years.
Bill told us about the morning he first heard about the Kenow wildfire.
Saw the news that morning as I was pouring myself a cup of coffee and said everybody would be focused on fighting the fire and saving infrastructure and keeping people safe and all those good things. But on the other end of that news feed, there's Bill Perry thinking, this is going to be like Christmas. Because archaeology is just like a needle in a haystack normally, that the sites and the artifacts are actually relatively hard to find, which is a good thing. But what the fire did is that it took away the haystack, and so all you saw on the surface was the all-important cultural needles, if you will.
The year after the fire, Bill put together the Post-Kenow Wildfire Archaeology Project. Archaeologist Dylan Frank was one of the crew members.
The landscape was completely bare, and that's what archaeologists love because it makes things much, much easier for us. Nisto nadanuko akawa misatu mistakist. Hello everyone, my name is Dylan Frank, and I am a Cultural Resource Impact Assessment Officer. I was actually born and raised just to the east of the park, about 20 kilometers away in Cardston, but I'm also a member of the Blackfoot Confederacy, and specifically the Kainai Nation. It's almost like working in my own backyard. So imagine if you were looking for a sock in your room in the morning and you couldn't find it, but then you cleaned your room, the sock's just sitting right there. It was essentially the same for artifacts on the ground, because normally they're all covered with dirt and vegetation, but after the fire came through and brushed all that away, we had artifacts just sitting there waiting for us to discover.
Every morning that you went out, you knew you were going to find stuff because you couldn't help it. If you're thinking of the history of Waterton as a book, that the fire has opened that book to the first couple of pages, and it's just right there on the surface, and you can read it.
But it was a limited time opportunity.
We were under the gun time-wise, Because what happens after a fire is that it doesn't take long for the vegetation to start to come back. Our amazing Christmas morning is just rapidly disappearing. The first couple of years was us racing against the vegetation and recording as much as we could, testing as much as we could before it just disappeared again. But after that, we spent 2 years focusing on the sites that could tell us the most about how people lived, how they adapted.
With so many archaeological sites, the crew almost didn't know where to begin.
When people ask where an archaeological site is in the park, I often just tell them that the whole park is an archaeological site, essentially, and Indigenous people weren't localized to just one location. They had a relationship with the entire landscape.
Dylan told us about his first day of excavations near the Middle Waterton River.
Me and my 5 colleagues were all standing on the riverbank, scratching our heads, thinking, where do we even start? The entire area is a site, so everywhere is good. So I took off my hat, threw it in the air, and a gust of wind picked it up and it landed somewhere. And that's where I decided I was going to dig. As I dug down, I found bones and artifacts, and eventually I even found a boiling pit. And a boiling pit would be a hole dug in the ground, and you would line the hole with animal hide, and then you'd fill it with water. And from there, you would take heated rocks from a fire and put the rocks into the water. And that way you can cause the water to start boiling. And with the boil, you can cook food as needed. So that was a very, very unique and cool thing for me to find by just tossing my hat into the air.
Just watching these guys skip along the landscape, I swear that their feet hardly touch the ground.
The involvement of local Indigenous communities was key to this project.
We wanted to do a lot of work with the nations for a couple of reasons. Archaeology historically has been very academic, right? And it's very about Western science, and it doesn't take into account other ways of knowing. We learned so much from Indigenous partners.
It's always a little interesting to explain that Western science isn't above Indigenous science and knowledge, because most people grow up and that's the only thing they know, and then they get introduced and it just blows their mind because it's completely different from everything they were taught and raised. So it's just, I guess, a difference of worldviews and just trying to understand how other people perceive things.
You don't often get these privileges in archaeology where you can get to work on a sacred landscape like this. You can get to work with the people that are directly related to the people that actually stayed and used these landscapes. And so you can sit around a table with the elders, sipping coffee and trading stories and humor back and forth. And then suddenly you realize, oh, I know that place. There's an archaeological site there.
So the relationship between Indigenous people and archaeology has kind of been difficult in the past. And that's because archaeologists did not consult with the nations themselves. It would always be a non-Indigenous person going out, collecting the information and telling the story to the world without even involving the people that they're talking about. And in many cases, that caused lots of confusion and stories to be written improperly about these people. And it's just caused a snowball effect of consistently being wrong about who these people actually are.
I really enjoy hearing the elders' knowledge, and I enjoy seeing Western science starting to adopt that knowledge that's passed down. The elders were there to provide advice on where good places to look for camps were. And the advice they gave the archaeologists at the time provided some newfound sites.
They can tell us a story and we can find the site that goes with that story.
One Indigenous plants elder said, when I was a kid, I was told about some of these plants, but I've never seen them. And so it took a fire like that behaving just the way that it did in order to bring that out.
We've made sure to put sage in our shoes when we actually visit some of the sacred sites, and that's at the request of the elders that we collaborate so closely with. If it's to essentially ward off any bad spirits that might still be lingering around the site. Another very important part of the project is the Indigenous Archaeology Advisory Committee. Elders and knowledge keepers from each of the Blackfoot Nation communities come and give us guidance on how they want to see archaeology actually talked about moving into the future. So It's giving them the power to tell their own story once again.
What I would hope is that for places like the national park to look at their Indigenous partners as equal opportunity partners to redevelop and redesign the way in which the Indigenous nations interact with the park. There's so much opportunity to tap the local Indigenous communities for Indigenous knowledge for the sake of preservation and stewardship, for the Indigenous nations to work together with parks and to make them better.
Over 5 seasons of archaeology work, the team increased their understanding about the movements and activities of people millennia ago.
The people that frequented this area traveled from all over. We've found artifacts that are sourced as far as North Dakota and South Dakota, and all the way over into Yellowstone and into Idaho.
They found camps that were likely used on and off for centuries. Indigenous groups would have returned to the Waterton area again and again, leaving behind layers and layers of artifacts as the years passed. Bones of the animals they hunted, campfire rings, boiling pits, teepee rings, stone tools, and debitage, the leftover material from making those tools.
And so over time, you get a site that could be 1 to 2 meters thick and represent 10,000 years of people hanging out on this landscape. I started to realize how dense the archaeology was along these travel corridors and how large these meeting area sites actually were. Like some were about 2 to 3 kilometers in diameter. We had no idea.
It's just really phenomenal to see this blossoming of so many different things happening in this area. This was not just kind of a stopover point. In a lot of cases, some of these massive sites that we're finding really are a meeting point.
The Kootenai and the Kinbasket and the Shoshone and those guys that are primarily into BC and Washington, Idaho, they often came over here to hunt and to trade. But these sites were actually trading hubs, not just travel corridors. And the Blackfoot have tons and tons of stories about this.
In total, the archaeologists found artifacts made from 23 different types of stone. Some made good arrowheads or spearheads. Some made good scraping tools. Others were used to craft tools out of other stones. Of the 23 varieties of stone, only 3 are found in the Waterton area, suggesting that trade networks were vital for producing the tools needed for everyday life.
This fire has allowed us to see not only these large places where people gathered together to live, to work, to sustain themselves, but we're also seeing how they came to these areas.
Waterton is located in a skinny part of the Rockies where everything comes down to just a few miles in width. But what we found after the fire is that those trails are still there.
We're seeing these trails pop up. We're seeing materials being brought in from other areas.
And these trade routes, essentially, they follow the mountain passes.
Why those trails? They were all started by animals. The buffalo, the coyote, buffalo, elk, the moose, because they're very picky. And so this exploration, what they followed, these were animal trails. And if animals can find a way to go across the mountain, a river, they followed that. And that's what they were, animal trails first, Then, human trails and trading routes.
So if you think about it, humans are animals, and when you're traveling, you'll take the path of least resistance. So the mountain passes are where you would go. And so when you're going down these corridors, you'd often encounter other people. And maybe they had a material from South Dakota that you wanted, and maybe they wanted to go hunt bison in the area. And so you made a trade of some sort. And that's how things were brought into the area.
If you're picturing flat, easy trails in the woods here, think again.
One of the absolute funniest things we learned while we were doing this backcountry work is that we are wimps. because we would be traveling up these trails that have all these lovely switchbacks in them so that you can take your time and catch your breath and your knees don't hurt. And we would find these old ancient trails. We could see them where the vegetation had gone, and sometimes there would be artifacts on these trails, and they would just go straight up the side of the mountain.
Indigenous ancestors in the past were so much stronger as human beings than we are nowadays. And our elders will tell us that we wouldn't have been able to survive back then.
Here's us hauling our shovels and things up these switchbacks, gasping, and then looking at these trails that just go straight up and thinking, someone hauled a bison up this.
In total, the crew found over 17,000 artifacts. A small percentage were connected to settler activities like metalwork and drilling at the first oil well in Western Canada, a National Historic Site dating back to the early 1900s. The majority of artifacts, though, are connected to Indigenous peoples in three distinct eras: pre-contact, the time before the arrival of Europeans; proto-contact, spanning roughly from the 1500s to the 1800s, when European trade goods started to make their way across the continent, but before Europeans themselves arrived in Western North America. And then there's the post-contact era, which we're living in today. The majority of the pre-contact artifacts were debitage, those flakes of stone left over from making tools. But there were also animal bones used as tools or showing signs of butchering, as well as complete stone tools like scrapers and projectile points.
A projectile point is a tool that is used mainly for hunting. The first type of projectile point is a spear point, and those were much larger. They were used around 10 to 12,000 years ago, in the time right after the glaciers receded from the area. And so during that time, there was actually some pretty large animals, such as mammoths and other megafauna, and so to actually take down a large animal, you needed large tools. You would attach it to a spear shaft or later on an arrow shaft, and then you could use it to thrust, throw, and take down an animal in that way.
The shafts were made of organic material like wood, so they decomposed a long time ago. And even if they'd survived the millennia, like the stone arrowheads, they would have burned in the fire.
After the spear technology came the atlatl technology, and that was a great innovation by the people. They essentially took the spear that they were using before and added another lever to it that attached to the back. And once you had that extra lever, you could add an incredible amount of velocity to the operation. And so once you had that, you could whip the spears quite far distances, making it much more efficient and safe for the hunter.
If you've ever used a tennis ball throwing device to play fetch with a dog, you'll probably understand how an atlatl increases throwing power.
And after a while, that technology was replaced by the bow and arrow technology. And that used a much smaller projectile point on the tip. And that's because the bow and arrow technology had much more mechanical force already part of the process. Essentially packed the same amount of punch as an atlatl being tossed or a spear being thrust. And so those projectile points slowly got smaller and smaller over the years.
I was able to find my first atlatl point. I was out with Dylan Frank, one of the archaeologists, and we were actually at a conference and we had a break. So Dylan said, I'm gonna go take a look. He's gonna go walk around. And I followed him and he overstepped it and I yelled, Dylan! And you could just see the frustration on him as I yelled at it because he knew what I found. I'm a pretty reserved, calm person, but I think I was yelling pretty good that day. And I found my atlatl point. I immediately made a tobacco offering. With your point, your arrowheads, your spear point, is the saying is, if you don't find them, they'll find you. So when I say that was my atlatl point, that was given to me. It's mine, but Pikes Canada has it. But everyone knows it's mine.
Not all tools were used for hunting.
Then you see artifacts like scrapers, which would have been used to process hides once the animals had been hunted. Or we see things like mauls, which are these big, huge hammerstone heads that would have been used either as grinding stones or to break open bones for marrow. And that the kind of more domestic, as you would call it, side of these activities. These hunters cannot live in isolation, right? Someone needs to process the materials, cook the materials, make hides into teepees, clothes, moccasins, water skins. Tells us so much more about what's happening on the landscape. We even see things like small-scale tools being used by children. These hunters do not spring fully grown from the ground. They were once children. They had to be taught. They had to be trained. So these other artifacts that we see really help us to understand the full gamut of life.
In addition to stone tools, the archaeologists also found artifacts like glass beads, more geared towards aesthetics than utility.
They're super tiny and they're really hard to find, but after the fire went through and removed all the vegetation, you could actually see these tiny little white and teal beads sitting in the soil.
It's a real treat when you're walking along and you pick up a metal trade point and you know exactly where it came from. Then you start picking up glass beads that were probably part of some ceremonial or decorative piece of clothing.
Jennifer told us about her most exciting find.
It was pouring rain, it was sleety, it was cold, it was absolutely gross. And only one of our volunteers decided to join us because it was gross. And we took him to one of the sites that is a big meeting place where we see lots and lots of campfire rings and things all together. And as we were showing him around, I found a argillite, which is a type of stone, biface tool. So that basically just means a stone tool that's been sharpened on both sides. But it was broken off, and as I was looking at it, I thought to myself, I think I know what this is. But it's a little presumptuous without having the tip and the base, which is normally how we identify projectile points. So I didn't really say anything. I just let some people look at it. And by the time we got back into town, I had a message from one of my crew members that said, "Hey, do you think that biface is Scott's Bluff?"
A Scott's Bluff point is a long spear point, a very old spear point.
And I punched the air. I was so excited because I thought, yes, external validation. It's 9,000 years old, and it's the oldest thing I've ever found, and it was just so exciting to find this on such a miserable day. It's the oldest thing we found on the project, and it was a really cool day.
9,000 years ago, fire would have been a constant in the lives of the Indigenous peoples of this region, making life in the mountains and prairies with their harsh winters possible.
Without fire, survival would be very difficult. We had fire keepers within the camps prior to contact, and so these are usually young warriors. They'd set up the camp and they'd get the fire going before the whole camp arrived, because you'd have the elderly and the sick and, children that were cold. So by the time the camp arrived, the fires go in, the camp's already in the beginning stages of being set up.
Here's Mike Bruised-Head again.
And some were the fire experts to get that from scratch. Whether they rub 2 sticks or, they say so even the hand and then the grass, dry grass, and then starting it. That winter camping, once that fire started, it's never supposed to go out. The importance of fire to survive, to keep warmth, to cook, to light the pipe. So fire is of essence. We use it to smudge today. So you take the spiritualness of fire, it's even in our ceremonies. You take the rocks from the sweat lodge, fire, to heat that up in order for that sweat lodge to have that ceremony. Fire, 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 fire.
The Blackfoot people have a very rich history with fire on the landscape. It's been well documented that they did cultural burns in the area to encourage animals to come back or frequent other areas based on the regrowth of vegetation. Because after a fire, the regrowth is always incredibly rich based on the carbon in the ground.
Fire helped prevent shrubs and trees from encroaching on the prairie grassland, where the bison grazed.
We have done cultural burning in the foothills and on the grasslands. And we've always done that as part of who we are.
These weren't unmanaged landscapes. They were putting fire on the landscape to keep things clear and open.
That's a practice Indigenous cultures have used, especially across the plains. That kept the ecosystem balanced. You didn't have the underbrush, commonly referred to as fuel, that sets off these huge wildland fires. When I was a kid, I'd laugh at some of the older people because they would burn their lawns and be like, oh, look at that crazy guy, he's burning his lawn. And then within 2 weeks, he had the greenest grass out of anybody.
In my last maybe decade, really observing the environment here in southern Alberta, we've had a lot of fires. And now, as you know, and as we all know, they're coming more and more. And there's been an emerging thought about engaging Indigenous people to say, is there a solution that we can look at in the cultural ways to help assist with some of those concerns that climate change is presenting?
We're working with our Indigenous partners, specifically the Kainai Lands Department, and they're bringing fire back to the land. So Waterton Lakes National Park has provided that wildland fire training to members of the Lands Department out in Kainai. When we do a prescribed fire in the park, mostly the big ones, we'll have an elder come out and do a little blessing ceremony prayer before we do that. And we'll also get the trained fire crew from Kainai to come out and help with those fires.
Seeing the mountain on fire, there's almost this spectacle to it, but it's also this feeling that, well, we're not in charge and we need to coexist and to be good stewards of the area that we have because it can change on a dime.
When speaking to members of the Blackfoot Confederacy, one thing comes through loud and clear: a deep personal connection to this place.
The land is sacred to the people, to our people. And when we look at the mountains, we look at the trees, the water, the rocks. Most people see things that aren't alive. We look at a mountain and we know that's alive. We look at rocks, we know they're alive. So everything has a spirit to the Blackfoot people.
Now those mountains are getting the respect by tourists, everybody, that those mountains are alive. I could feel the energy that our people shared and the knowledge that came from the where the spirit comes to you through your pipe, through your ceremony, through your song, and tells you how to and guides you what medicines to use, what songs and what ceremonies.
So Indigenous ancestors in the past, because they were very fit and very strong mentally and spiritually, physically, emotionally. The 4 balances in life to keep you as a balanced human being. So when all 4 are in sync, then you're a healthier person. So that's why I come to the mountains. That's why I come to Waterton, is to get grounded. So when I go out, I will make the offering before my hike. It's just that connection to the land that it's very powerful. It's something that's been lacking in our communities because, and bringing up the residential school, and the reason behind residential schools was to take that spiritual side of things, that connection to the land, to the animals, the air, the water, to take that away from Indigenous people, to break them. That's why we see so much poverty. We see so much substance abuse. That's why it's so powerful for me to be in the mountains, to do my ceremony and to find that connection to the land. And I've brought many people out to do their first hike, to show them where I go. And some people end up becoming very emotional, crying, because it's something that's been lacking in their lives.
My wife and I, when we want to get away, when we want to rejuvenate, when we want to reconnect, we go to the mountains. So We love to go out and just be out there. It allows you to just feel maybe insignificant among all the big scenery. And it's such a nice, calm place. So in a sense, when we go down there to connect with the mountains, when we go down there to be with the mountains, it's like that coming home. It's like that unplugging from this place where, we're kind of boxed into this little location where we're at, to go to a place where you're just free. That's how you should feel when you go to the park. That's how we feel.
Waterton Lakes National Park is open to the public year-round. It's a 3-hour drive from Calgary, or an hour and a half from Lethbridge. Stop by the new Visitor Centre to experience interpretive exhibits that highlight Blackfoot history, traditions, culture, and the deep connections to Bukta-Maksikami. ReCollections is produced by Parks Canada. A big thank you to consulting producers Joseph Manyfingers and Dylan Frank. Thanks as well to Ira Provost, Bill Perry, Jennifer Ailes, Clifford Cranebear, and Dr. Mike Bruised-Head, who wrote his PhD thesis on the impact of erasing Blackfoot place names in Bukta-Maksikami. We'll provide a link in the show notes. For loads of extras, including a Google Arts and Culture exhibition with images of the archaeology work and artifacts, take a look at the show notes or visit parks.canada.ca/recollections. I'm your host, Fred Shepard. Thanks for listening. Did you know that the designation of many of Canada's national historic sites, people, and events began with a suggestion from the public? If you have a suggestion, check out the show notes or visit parks.canada.ca/commemorate for information on how to nominate a new event, person, or site that's important to the history of Canada.